Hello, internet, wherever you're watching this, whichever platform you're watching this video on. Hello and welcome. Today we're going to have a look at an article on the Conservative Woman, entitled "Weasel Words and Broken Promises: A Roadmap to Endless Lockdown." I'll leave a link to the article in this video description, along with links to all my other platforms. But right, let's get on to the article then. It's by Lieutenant General Jonathan Riley on April 14th, 2021. In all the nations that make up the United Kingdom, we are governed by people who may differ on some aspects of politics, but who now share disreputable anti-democratic beliefs and whose goal appears to be the end of liberty. Lies and lockdown are their methods, loss of liberty their aim. Implicit in these three ideas is an ever-increasing state power grab, the smashing of small, medium and large businesses, and the denial of family life. Their physical expression can be seen in the destruction of hard-won civil liberties, the end of travel, control of basic social interaction, and the creation of a nation of scared, illness-obsessed people confined to their houses, vaccine-compliant and state-dependent. The real roadmap is not, as Boris Johnson asserts, out of lockdown, but one to keep us in it. Why are they doing this? The discredited Professor Neil Ferguson's interview with the Times provided one clue. They did it because they could. Sage had watched as China enacted this innovative intervention in pandemic control that was also a medieval intervention. Sage debated whether it could be effective here. China, is a communist one-party state, we said. We couldn't get away with it in Europe, we thought, and then Italy did it, and we realised we could. Announcing the first lockdown on March 23rd last year, Johnson said, "I can assure you that we will keep these restrictions under constant review." He told us we had to lock down to protect the NHS's ability to cope. But when it was apparent by the summer that the NHS was no longer in any real danger of not being able to cope, having discharged patients en masse from hospital beds in March, leading to an increase in deaths at home and in care homes. But why the government chose to double down and has maintained the restriction momentum since, in the face of all the evidence that shows it is unnecessary and deeply damaging to the health of the nation as well as the economy, is yet to be revealed. Perhaps at the G7 meeting in June? Remember the time we were told that restrictions would end when the R number dropped below 1, when the R number was the key measure. Keeping the R down will be vital to our recovery, and we can only do it by discipline and by working together, Johnson blustered as quoted in the Financial Times. But when the R number did fall below 1, new criteria came along. It all became about cases, with a case defined as anyone testing positive from a PCR test, regardless of whether the person was actually ill. High cycle PCR testing, despite all its problems of false positives and the many scandals associated with it, was ramped up in order to deliver the cases needed to maintain restrictions. Ex-Pfizer scientist Dr. Mike Eden later called it a PCR false positive pseudo-epidemic. This was necessary, as by the end of July 2020 no one was dying from coronavirus. It was also then that the government mandated face masks. People were told to mask up when they went into shops in high summer in response to a winter upper respiratory tract virus. Most complied to the extent of wearing masks outside in the fresh air. Then in November came the great vaccine breakthrough, when the UK was the first country to grant emergency approval to the novel Pfizer vaccine that would protect the vulnerable and buy the rest of us liberty. Ministers avowed there would be no shortcut on safety or effectiveness. The great and the good fell for it. If the vaccine delivered freedom, they would have it. Not so. What became apparent was a coercion strategy, and that all the population would have to be vaccinated, whether they needed it or not. All of a sudden, once the rollout was well underway, it became conveniently unclear how protective the vaccine actually was. The ugly head of spurious variants was promulgated by the government, Health Secretary Matt Hancock making the first of his variant warnings before Christmas. Soon the prospect of the necessity of annual boosters was mooted, and all the while the population was being softened up for vaccine passports or COVID certificates by Weasel word ministers. The current offer in prospect is of some limited freedoms over the summer in return for compliance with the various experimental vaccines now being rolled out, but with most control measures remaining: social distancing, disgusting term, masks, a badge of compliance not a medical necessity, restrictions on events and on travel. Given the government's behavioural policy form, it is hard not to guess at the intentions behind these conditional promises. 1. To lull the people into a false sense of optimism and, through the creation of artificial shortages, make them beg for the vaccine. 2. To head off anti-lockdown parties' votes at the May elections. 3. Allow the G7 meeting to happen in Cornwall. And a possible 4th, allow Johnson's wedding to go ahead. With all this out of the way, the public will find themselves once more the government's prey. Dr. Ramsey of Public Health England told Andrew Marr on March 21st that the planned end of restrictions on June 21st would not bring normality. She went unchallenged by him. In spite of the vaccine rollout, declining rates of infection and deaths, and empty hospital, Dr. Ramsey, it seems, as billed by Gary Oliver on March 23rd in TCW, the expert who's happy for restrictions to drag on for years. Her objective, as described by TCW's Laura Perrins and others, for example, the Liverpool Echo, is to keep lockdowns going indefinitely, confident that few will oppose them. And as a senior official in Public Health England, she was clearly given free rein to express it. Although all the most vulnerable groups have received at least their first vaccine dose, we are told that a return to freedom could be delayed by significant vaccine shortages. On March 10th, Julia Hartley-Brewer of Talk Radio interviewed Transport Secretary Grant Shapps. He failed to worm his way out of an earlier undertaking that if the government did not fully unlock the country by early March, after the most vulnerable groups were vaccinated, he would stand on the barricades to get our freedoms back. Can we believe him? What happened to Matt Hancock's promise in an interview in The Spectator on January 9th that when COVID hospital cases fall and pressure on the NHS is lifted, quote, that is the point at which we can look to lift the restrictions. The goal is not to ensure that we vaccinate the whole population. Before that point, it is to vaccinate those who are most vulnerable. End quote. At that point, the majority will be unprotected, he said. However, he asserted, we are going to have a great summer, and he would still, quote, cry freedom. To date, there has been no such cry from him, in fact the reverse. Just 1 month after Hancock's brash words, we were already being told that restrictions would need to remain until, quote, until the whole population is vaccinated. In fact, as MP Steve Baker said on March 20th in The Sun, restrictions are now tougher than they were last summer before the vaccine rollout began. Shamefully, there is even a push now to vaccinate children who are at no risk from COVID. Mark Drakeford, First Minister of the Welsh Government, admitted to the newspaper that life will not return to normal in 2021 despite the rollout. As for having a great summer, Shapps says, I can't give you a definitive will there or will there not be. The opportunity to take holidays this next year, either at home or abroad. This is now confirmed, with foreign travel for any leisure purpose banned until July at the earliest. The date creeps ever backwards. On many occasions over the past year, 11 times according to Politics Home, the government has insisted it had no plans for vaccine passports. Yet on December 21st, 2020, the Daily Mail had already revealed that 2 companies had started to work to develop them. And on March 25th, Johnson announced that he will, as he was always going to do, attempt to roll these out, creating a new apartheid on the basis of discrimination on health grounds rather than skin colour. Good luck with the legal minefield that this will sow. It all reminds me forcibly of conditions under communism in Eastern Europe before 1989. It is hard not to conclude either that the vaccine is ineffective and the continuation of restrictions is to disguise this, along with the enormous sums of money being made from it, or that, regardless of its effectiveness, the vaccine is simply another control measure designed to instill fear and compliance. Of course, both could be true. Public Health England seems to confirm this. On March 18th, Yvonne Doyle, its medical director, said, "The vaccine does not give you a pass. Even if you've had it, you must continue to follow all the guidelines." On the one hand, the government is taking steps to force everyone to have a vaccine. On the other, the NHS, the manufacturers and even Ferguson admit that the vaccine is unreliable, will not prevent anyone from catching or passing on COVID, and is likely to have unpredictable long-term side effects because of the type of technology used. And that's where we reach the end of that article. So, yeah, let me know what you think to that. Leave a like, subscribe. Thanks for watching. Peace out.